Hello again, TVP World. Rafał Tomański. We stay, of course, on the topic of commemoration of 83rd anniversary of outbreak of the Second World War that happened year to date. And our next guest will be Mr. Marcin Kaczorowski, spokesperson and the deputy head of Memorial Foundation. Hello, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
Good to have you with us. The reason why we meet today, not only the anniversary, but as well, today, within a few hours, there will be a new report published and presented to the media and to, as well, the international public opinion. The report on how much should the Germans pay to Poland in reparation for the atrocities and for the destruction during the Second World War. What do we know so far? What can be found in the report?
Well, what we already know is the incredible loss of the of national assets. Well, if we just think about Warsaw, I'd like to recall a situation from years ago when Mr. Lech Kaczyński was the mayor of Warsaw, and Rika Steinbach wanted to get some compensation for the land and property lost in Western Poland during the shift of borders. And well, to cut the long story short, Mr. Kaczynski said at the time, well, hold on a second, I will give you an invoice for Warsaw. And for Warsaw alone, it will be $50 billion if we just think about the loss of property. We don't mention 700 to 800,000 people that were murdered by Germans during World War II. So if you think about the whole country, 850 billion has usually been the amount mentioned to date. However, attorney Wiesław Misiek, I had a privilege and pleasure to work with, has always said that that's really a very low estimate, and we are talking only about the material losses and not about 6 million people that were murdered this way or another one. We are not talking about slave labor. We are not talking about mental losses of the mental damage of the families, because it's been going on for generations. So I wonder what the report is going to include. Is it going to focus mostly on the assets, or perhaps on the psychological aspects, on the former concentration camp inmates that are still alive, their families still suffer. So I think this subject to be full in its coverage should mention all those aspects, both mental and the material ones.
Is it possible to estimate the losses, as you said, the psychological one, the damages, irreparable, of course, the people dead, the infrastructure ruined, but even the rough estimate?
How much is one person's how much is one person's life worth? We also Poles frequently talk about the lost future possibilities of a nation.
And that's very
Our
important.
elites were targeted. Yes, we lost about 40% of the lawyers. We lost about 1/3 of the priests. We lost the teachers. We lost professors, just to mention the Lviv situation. Yes, we lost the leaders, political leaders from different parties, socialists, nationalists, you name it. So how do you estimate that? How do you estimate the loss of the minorities also that formed Poland? So it's I think we can only be talking about doing some justice to Poland, and I think that the declaration of the German government that is all done, and water under the bridge, and so on and so forth, is outrageous, because what has Poland been compensated so far? Maybe some millions for slave labor, but we are not talking about the victims of concentration camps. We are talking about the victims of the forced labor camps. And as a matter of fact, some German companies paid very low compensation in comparison to, say someone spent a year in a forced labor camp. How much is it worth? Definitely not a few thousand zlotys. That these are scraps we're talking about. That's an insult to the people who were actually in those forced labor camps, where they were beaten, starved, sometimes to death. That's if we look at it from this perspective, Poland gained something close to zero after, if we talk about the compensation for the extermination and slave labor. Germans sometimes mention that yes, they lost Western Greater Poland, parts of Silesia and Pomerania to Poland. Yes, that's true, but that's compensation for the land that Poland lost in the east. And just to remind our audience that Poland had 389,000 square kilometers before the war and 312,000 after the war. Yes, Silesia and Western Greater Poland were more industrialized than Eastern Poland, but still, again, Lvov was the second most important Polish city before the war. So it's not like the gain, that loss didn't hurt us. It hurt us a lot and terribly, and we still miss Lvov from that respect. We were given Wrocław, so well, Breslau at the time was completely ruined, also thanks to the German strategy of holding it as a fortress as long as possible. And also, it's good to remember that that land was ruined, and also thanks to the Soviet policy of stealing whatever was possible, including infrastructure, railway tracks, just to have more scrap metal, and so on and so forth. So, what Poland gained in the West absolutely is the compensation for the suffering, murder, slaughter, and the enslavement of billions of Poles.
And we know, of course, after the Second World War ended, because of the negligence of the Western Allies, Poland came under the Soviet influence. And it were another decade, several decades of potential economic losses. So maybe we shouldn't estimate just the rough numbers and just concentrate on the amounts of billions and even trillions of US dollars or any other currency just to compensate. But maybe we should imagine a hypothetical scenario. What if Poland might have gotten a part of the Marshall Plan and be elevated in terms of GDP and make some kind of estimate through the decades and ask the Germans or even tell the Germans to equal those set of losses from such projection? What do you think?
Well, that would be just to do, that's for sure. However, I would just put it in more realistic perspective for starters. How about we start from education? Because that will be the step one to convince the German society that they should do that, exactly what you said. Since I worked with the groups of German tourists many times in my career, and met people who really wanted to find out more about what happened in Poland. Well, I never complained about those groups because they showed respect, actually, and I never got stupid or disrespectful questions. However, they left those meetings knowing much more than they assumed they would find out after those trips. What I want to say is German education in this area doesn't function at all, doesn't work at all. Germans have no idea what happened to Poles. Their educators, their schools, of course, focus on Holocaust. They have to know that they were pressed by the Jewish communities to properly teach about what happened to Jews during World War II. They have no idea about Operation Intelligentsia. They have no idea about Operation AB. They have no idea about massacres of civilians during Warsaw Uprising, about up to 1 million Poles, ethnic Poles that were murdered in concentration camps. So if it's to me it's not a surprise when I hear that about what 3% of Germans say that actually compensations should be paid to Poland. Why? Because they believe it was just another occupation. I heard it from a German. Well, France was under occupation. Czech Republic was under occupation. Denmark too was under occupation. Well, Poland just under occupation. I know that Jews were persecuted and so on. So that's what I heard, and it's I heard it many times. So suddenly, oh, surprise! There was a genocide of Polish people. It's incredible that after all those decades of declarations that we remember, we bow before the victims of Polish victims and so on, you find out that actually the German governments have done unfortunately, all in their power, actually, that this genocide should be forgotten by the German nation. It's a very sad thing. So if we start from education, I believe that any decent and any honest person in their heart would have to admit in Germany that that's what should be done to compensate Poland for what happened. The Any amount is on the table here, but it's not about the amount. It's first about the recognition of doing another nation wrong, recognition of a genocide, and that's where we should really begin our debate. I think with the German society, because with politicians, I think it's been decades of empty talk.
Very important points, sir, and I'm very glad that you described the situation with education. However, it will take some time, at least a generation, to be educated within those new norms. And at first, they have to be introduced, implemented by German politicians, of course, and their system of education. At the end of our conversation, last question to you: how about the legal basis to get the reparation done? What can be the legal perspective to do so?
Well, I would start by saying what cannot be the legal basis for rejecting that, because Germany frequently gets back to 1953. First of all, in international law, if you are made to do something under external pressure, and undoubtedly Poland was under external pressure by the Soviet Union, practically occupied, then such a legal act cannot be found valid. By no means, Poland had was not a sovereign country, was not an independent country. Of course, many would argue then, okay, what about the borders? Then the borders were recognized in 1970 by Germany. Genocide is not something that evaporates after even 100 years, and we know that African countries also go back to what happened to them at the hands of colonial powers. We're talking about the Nama and Herero tribe in Namibia, where the colonial Germany, Imperial Germany, wiped out two tribes, and the sharks were used instead of crematoria, and so on and so forth. And they justly go back to that period. And if they can do it, if Greece can do it too, because interestingly, many German politicians recognize the Greek claims, and they say Polish claims are invalid. How is it possible?
Very interesting, and we have to remember, be aware of all those technical details, legal details as well. Thank you very much for insightful story about those possibilities with reparations, and of course we are waiting for the report to be published today right after noon. Thank you very much, sir. Again, our guest was Mr. Marcin Kaczorowski, spokesperson and deputy head of Memorial Foundation, People's Memorial Foundation. Thank you again, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
And of course, much more still to come on TVP World. Stay with us.